Good morning. This is Chris Pomery in Yorkshire in the north of England. It's very blustery outside, I have to say. We've got the tail end of a hurricane coming off the North Atlantic, so there's a lot of squally wet rain beating at the window as I speak. And I'm hoping that my 6-year-old really has gone to bed this time. He's had his last instalment of Winnie the Pooh, and I'm hoping I'm not going to be interrupted whilst I'm recording this. Now, this is a carbon-friendly presentation because, as you will have noticed, I'm not physically in your presence. You can't see me, and rather unnervingly for me, I can't see you. I work as a teacher over here in England, and I'm very used to having eye contact with my pupils and people I lecture to. So it's a bit disconcerting not being able to see you, but I'm going to persevere with this, and I hope we have fun doing it. I've resisted the temptation of trying to animate my face here in the corner. I don't want to do anything fancy, because I think a lot of you actually already know me and you've seen my face before. What I've got for you this morning is a short presentation of 9 slides, which I hope will inspire you to continue to move the Dalton surname project forward. I think you can be very impressed with how far you've come, and I think you're on the verge of doing something quite special, and I'm hoping that at the end of this you'll feel inspired to devote some energies towards achieving that goal. So the story for the DGS so far of the DNA component of the surname project is that we've been collecting Y chromosome results from any Dalton we can find, from any source. As you know, there are a number of other Dalton DNA projects floating around, so we've been able to collate results from them bit by bit over the years, and we're including rarer variant surnames, different spellings, within the main project as well. Now the overriding activity we have when we put the results together is to group them into genetic families, and a genetic family is simply a collection of individuals who have the same or markedly similar Y chromosome DNA results, to the point where we can assume, or we hypothesize, that they have the same surname, that they are actually all related to a single ancestor within that surname. In other words, there is a family tree waiting to be documented that is being revealed by the DNA results, but we don't yet have that family tree in our hands. So at the moment we can talk about it as a genetic family, whilst we're waiting to document it. The other thing we're doing within the project is applying a common standard of 37 markers. This gives us quite a good level of resolution when we're looking at the results. And point number 4, what we've ended up with now is a matrix of results that we can use to compare with each new person joining the project. So that's anyone whose tree stems from or who lives in the home countries of the United Kingdom or Ireland, plus any of the immigrant recipient countries where Daltons have moved to, such as the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, or wherever. Now, my overriding point here is that you now have one of the most advanced surname projects in the world that combines documentary research and DNA activity. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about what you've actually got in terms of results, and then think about how you can use those results to move forward. So where the project is now, well, as I said, we've built up a matrix of DNA results which are specifically helpful for North American residents. We have a project administrator found and appointed for most of the genetic families, certainly the key ones, and the DGS has created a detailed report for each genetic family which contains 3 key elements. One is a table listing for each member of the genetic family their differences per marker from the modal DNA result that defines that specific genetic family. Then there's also a chart which is quite new to the most recent edition of the report, which shows the inferred genetic connections between each of them based upon those DNA results. And then there's also the third element, which is a list for each of each member, which shows their oldest documented ancestors. And I'm going to show you now in the next 3 slides how those 3 elements link together. So here's the first one, the table listing the genetic differences per marker for each member. This is part of a table which is for genetic family A, which is the Virginia Daltons, but the others look pretty much similar. And what you're seeing here is each column represents an individual marker within the DNA test, and each row is an individual who's been tested. Now, it's quite small print here because I wanted to give you an impression of how many results you are. Actually, there are more markers that head off the slide towards the right, and more individuals who've been tested who would tumble down below the bottom of the slide. So this is just the corner of the chart that actually appears in the report. You get a sense of how it works here. The top line you'll see there, Dalton genetic family A modal values. Most people within the genetic family will have the same result for each marker, and only occasionally will they have a different one. And when you're looking at the results in their raw state, where they give you all the numbers from the DNA testing company, it's quite confusing to try and pick out which ones look different. So all I've done here is I've put the modal result right across the top on the top row, and then underneath for each individual who has the same result as the modal result for that particular marker, we've now put an asterisk in there instead of the value. And you can see that most, certainly on the top few rows, they're all asterisks there. They all have the modal result. As you look down the page, you can see some individual figures creeping in, so it's a bit of genetic difference that's been recorded in 1 or 2 markers for 1 or 2 people. And if you look at the whole chart, you'll see that's much clearly. Now, if you're used to dealing with DNA results, this table is very informative, and there is actually a way you can analyze a body of data like this, which I teach in a course, but it is quite convoluted, and you really do need to have a sense of what you're trying to do. It's quite time consuming. So I've been looking for some time for a way of presenting this in a slightly better fashion, and there is actually charting software available I've downloaded from the internet. There's a couple of software items you have to work together, and what we produced as a result for each of the genetic families, based upon these tables of results, are a series of charts. So this is the second element in the report now, which is the chart showing for each genetic family the inferred genetic connections among its members. And this is the chart for genetic family A, the Virginia Daltons. You can see right in the middle, it's quite small there in relation to the slide, but at least you can see it in perspective, is the entire chart for all members of the genetic family. And then just on the right hand side, I've broken out the top half so you can see it in a little bit more detail. And what you have here are set on the right hand side, so you can see the kit numbers of the individuals, their name, and also the number of markers that they've tested on. And we've standardized these charts on 37 markers. So what you're looking at here is the genetic family and its results that are just simply expressed in a chart, in a visual form, which make it easier to work with. I think you can already see the advantages of doing that. So let's unpack this chart a little bit and see what information we can take from it. Well, if you look from the top down, you'll see that there is one set of about 10 people there, running from the top, kit number 164899, down to 183032. That's all one group there, and that is actually the modal result for the genetic family across 37 markers. There are about 10 people who've got that without any mutational differences at all. So there, the software's grouped all of those together. Now, that sounds quite good to have the modal result, but actually in terms of trying to work out their relationships with each other, it creates a few problems, because actually you need some slight genetic differences in order to create the relationships. They've all got the same modal result, and you can't really infer a particular relationship on the basis of that similarity. So those individuals could be brothers and uncles, or they could be quite distant relations. The one thing we can say is when the family tree is finally put together, each one of those will have a line back to the original ancestor, which has none of the members of that line have accumulated any mutations at all down to that individual. And once you've got the family tree in front of you and compared the two sets of data, that will be clear. But at the moment you can't really say a great deal about those individuals who are within the modal group. They could be very closely related in the tree or somewhat distant. But as you go down the chart, you get successive groups. You can see there are 3 smaller groups below that, 1 of 4 and the next 2 of 3 each. And those subgroups are defined in terms of a particular mutation. And what you'll find is, if you look at the results, is that all of them share a particular mutation on a particular marker, and that's why they've been grouped together. So they form, as it were, a subgroup within the genetic family, and they're all highly likely to be linked together on the basis of that mutation. So what you can say is that, for example, in that group of 4 below the modal group, that they are all more related to each other than they are to anyone else. And so if you were to rebuild the family tree, if you had it in front of you, you would see that they are all very closely linked together through a common ancestor who introduced the specific mutation into the genetic family. And so all of his descendants have therefore carried it from thenceforward. And you can see that marker, that mutation, within the group now, within that little subgroup now. And that's basically how this process works. The chart creates a series of subgroups, all of whom are more related to each other than they are to the other members within the genetic family. Now, they're all part of a family tree, but it's breaking up that family tree into sublines, which you can then go away and document. And you should find that those sublines do actually document together quite neatly. As you look down the chart, you'll see that it bends away slowly to the left. It sort of gets fatter at the bottom than it is at the top. And basically what you're seeing is more mutations accumulating the further down the chart you go. So the ones at the bottom, for example 100174, this person will have several mutations within its genetic heritage compared to the modal result. And what you'd infer from that is that those mutations must have been introduced relatively far back in time. Now, so you'll see at the bottom here that there is a time scale. That looks very, very specific, and I have to put at this point a slight word of caution, because this whole business of working out the time span to the most recent common ancestor or common shared ancestor is quite difficult, and I think this is produced by the software, but I wouldn't place a great deal of faith in terms of that. I wouldn't be looking to say, oh, there's 50 years there or 20 years there, that's 1 generation, 2 generations. And I think that's not as exact as it's used. And I've left it there so you can see it, but I wouldn't want you to focus on that. I think you need to look at the relationships of the individuals between the chart is much more important. So basically the lesson to take away from this, to use the chart, is that the person closest to you within a subgroup is the person you're most likely to be closest related to within the tree. Unfortunately, you can't take this chart and, as it were, turn it on its side or map it, morph it into a family tree. It is a set of data which shows you the genetic connections between the individuals. And once you've finished the family tree, you'll see that you've got 2 sets of data which are consistent with each other, but you can't somehow peer through this chart and see all the details of the family tree. You can see some of them because you can see the subgroups of people who share similar mutations, but you can't actually use it to create the family tree. It'll give you some hints, but it won't give you all of the answers. Right, let's move on to number 3. So this is the third item within the set that we are talking about within the report. This is the list showing the oldest common ancestor for each member. And again, this is written up for each report, for each genetic family. And you can see down the left-hand side, there's the kit number, then the name of the participant and the number of markers that they've tested on. the currently documented origin that they're reporting for their family tree, and then on the right hand side their oldest documented Dalton ancestor that they know about. And you can see that a number of these individuals stem from the same specific Dalton ancestor. So you can see they're pairing off into groups. So even within this documentational area, you've already got these subgroups forming. You know that different individuals believe that they are linked to each other. So you can use the kit numbers here and the oldest documented ancestor to go back to the chart in number 2 and just check to see that they're close to each other within the chart. If they're very far apart but they report the same oldest documented ancestor, potentially there's a problem there. And you can see, so this is the second set of data that's coming out from the research process, is the data that's being presented on the oldest ancestor by the individuals being tested. And as I said, once you've got all of this and you've created the family trees, and you're trying to end up with 2 sets of data, one that's documented and one that's genetic, which are consistent with each other. So those are the 3 elements within each report for each genetic family. I'm just going to go on quickly and show you the information, or rather the charts, because that's the newest element for 2 other genetic families. So here's the chart for genetic family B. This is the era Daltons. As you can see, we've got a number of those which are all tested on 37 markers. And again, you can see the way the chart slants off to the left, with increasing mutations of increasing age within the group, and you can see two subgroups at the top there, which those individuals are more related to each other than they are to everyone else in the tree. And here's a similar chart for genetic family D, the Golden Veil Daltons. Again, this chart, it's arranged slightly differently, but you can see that you can visualize the links between them, and you can see the subgroups there in the same way. And that's the way I would use this chart, really, is to look at the subgroups to see how they're related to each other. So that's where the report stands at this point. What next for you? Well, there's a task ahead to really start to pull together all the documentation that you have in order to create those family trees, and to pull that documentational data together. I have to say that you've done so well on the genetic side that you've reached a point where, although you can bring in new DNA results, I think you've basically identified the major genetic families. And once you've done that, the emphasis in terms of understanding the family trees and rebuilding them moves away from the genetic side and back towards the old-fashioned genealogical research. You've got the charts already. They increase the usefulness of the DNA results you've already collected, as they give you a visual indication of the other Daltons that each of you is genetically most related to. And you can assume that the people who are closest to you in the charts are as likely as not to be your closest relations within the family tree. So that's a very good way of using the chart, because each genetic family is simply an unresolved documentation issue. One day you will have a tree in front of you with all the evidence. Now, just at this point, I'd add a note of, not of caution, but just an advisory note, because a family tree, as documented, can be composed of more than one genetic family. In fact, with old family trees and very, very large ones with lots of living descendants, you certainly will have a number of different genetic markers within that documented tree, and that's because different genetic material can be introduced into a family tree for a number of reasons. It can be introduced for the reasons that everyone can guess, which would be illegitimacy, is the primary one. But there are also a host of social reasons why people might come into a family and adopt the Dalton name, or a name might change for whatever reason. So there are also those additional social reasons, and you should, if you are seeing smaller genetic families, as we are starting to do now, which link back to the same area of origin. So for the Virginia Daltons, to those same couple of counties in Virginia as the majority of the genetic family come from, you can be pretty sure that that's not a separate Dalton founding family tree, that that's actually different genetic material within one big family tree. That would be quite normal. So you have that additional task to use the genetic data, but also to think beyond it and move beyond it in the recreation of the documented family trees. And just to sum up, because we're on 20 minutes now, I would say that you've got pretty much all of the tools that you need to go ahead and do this. There aren't many other things that could be created for you from the genetic data that will really help you a great deal. You do actually now face a documentary task, and it will fall to an individual to use this data and pull it all together. That might be the project admin, it might be somebody else, and that's really up to you now to decide amongst yourselves how you're going to handle that. But I do think you're in a very, very strong position, and it's back to the records. Okay, that's me finished on 21 minutes. I'm very happy to take questions as I can, and I'm hoping we have a system set up to do this.